every low.
Welcome to Zola Mondays, creating Zola Mondays. We're so happy you joined us. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, and I'm so happy we were able to get it on board. You never know. Technology is wonderful until it isn't. So, welcome today. We are excited to be back with our discussion about dark light consciousness. Um, this week, we're going to focus on the implications of dark light matter on fueling the body. Boy, do we need that. We need to fuel this body because so much is going on around the world. As you know, Zola is that energy, electromagnetic energy that is fusing through all of us and between us. And it is that energy that will ignite within us should we require it and ask and demonstrate it in Gola, that healing, divine, spiritual energy. So, welcome. Happy to be here today. I'm Linda James Myers, who is your moderator for today. I am a past president of ABPsi as well as elder of elders emerita. And I am happy to introduce our special guest who's returned today, Dr. Bruce Bynum, Edward Bruce Bynum, amazing, amazing scholar who's done, well, if you heard last time, amazingly wonderful work. So welcome, Bruce. So glad to have you again.
Glad to be back. Glad to be back. Hope we have a expansive day today.
Excellent. And of course, we have our regular panelist. You want to introduce yourselves?
Yes, I'm Harvey Linder. I'm a retired clinical psychologist. I'm, well, actually, I'm unretired. I'm working as the clinical director at Metro Social Services in St. Paul, and I'm the chair of the board of directors at the Cultural Wellness Center in Minneapolis. I'm also a past Midwest regional rep for ABPsi and past chair of the Minnesota chapter of ABPsi, and I'm currently a member of the ethics committee of ABPsi. So I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you.
Happy to have you.
I'll pop in. I'm JoJo Hickson. I'm a third year clinical psych student from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology right here in DC. And I am also a member of the DC chapter of ABPsi and on the social media committee. So I'm super excited to come. I'm so in need of healing because I'm super clumsy, but thanks for having me, guys.
We're happy to have you. We couldn't be here without you, actually.
Yeah, I don't know why I said that. I'm just like, I'm so geeked to get some healing.
Hey everyone, I'll go next. My name is Gary Bollier. I am the Eastern Graduate Representative of the Student Circle, the current Vice Chair of the DC ABPsi chapter, and I am a fourth year clinical PsyD candidate at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, starting my internship this August, so I'll be done with my doctorate by next year, so it's lit.
Excellent.
And I'm also part of the social media impact team.
Great, great.
And he also just got his hair braided, so he's feeling extra confident today. You can see it. We see the light. We see the light. Yeah, I'm Evan August. I'm the Student Circle Chair. I am also the South Bone and Healing Circle Co-Chair. I'm also getting attacked by allergies, so it's my first time, I think, on Zola Monday with my glasses because my eyes are giving me a tough time. So I'm in need of Zola as well. So I'm excited about this.
We all need it. We all need it. Thanks so much. And I am so happy Bruce, let's just jump into this. What are the implications of living dark matter for fueling the body?
Well, we should probably start by giving a little background on what that dark light matter is. I mean, we were talking last time about basic biology, and that and human biology and all the mammals actually, our internal organs are covered by this dark living matter, which is known as melanin. And a specialized form of that occupies a central place in our central nervous system and in our brain. And it's called neuromelanin or brain melanin. And what's so unique about it, melanin in all people, is that because it's dark, it has the capacity to absorb light, absorb photons, absorb quanta, what we're calling Zola in some other terms. And it forms the structure, the basis, the template for the human nervous system, also the other primates, but also particularly the human nervous system. And as we go up the evolutionary line, there's more and more intense neuromelanin in particular in our central brain areas, covering the surface of our brain. That's what that gray matter is. And also the central lining of the spinal line, which is, it's all brain, it's all neural tissue. And so it forms the basis of our nervous system. And many, it will take us far afield, but many neurodegenerative disorders, Parkinson being one, are a function largely of the breakdown of the efficient functioning of neuromelanin in the brain. Same with Alzheimer's to some extent. So it's very central, very important, and contemporary science is paying more and more attention to it. And the ancient African traditions, particularly West African traditions, talked an awful lot about people who were, quote, strong in the head, unquote. This is a veiled allusion to this because melanin does increase as we age in the brain. And so far, most medical studies of it have focused on pathology, okay? But it should be well known that it is not primarily a pathological phenomenon, but is a phenomenon of health, vitality, energy, and intelligence, and particularly light. The whole story about evolution is the capture and the amplification and the higher order expressions of light. And that's what our nervous systems do. So that's why it's important. And again, one last thing before we jump off is that not only is it in our central spinal line, brain core, and surface of our brain, but also, very importantly, all of our internal organs are covered with some variation of melanin. So it's really important, really important.
That is important. I'm excited to hear that you get more melanin as you age.
Yes, you do. One is that it tends to accumulate in the brain. Okay. Now, there are some conditions in which when it goes awry, you have a disorder of one kind or another, but primarily it's not the case. And in many traditions, many wisdom traditions, there's an allusion, I should say, to increasing information and insight as one ages. And then traditionally in all societies, particularly Asian and African societies, the association of wisdom and insight with aging is very direct. It's only in the Western world that that's not the case. So being, quote, strong in the head, unquote, with all that implies, is associated with that. So bow to you, Linda, about that, elder developments.
May we be strong in the head. One of the things that I notice in Western culture is that we're always focusing on the pathology of aging. And
Yes.
It's almost like they've made Alzheimer's and all of those things like
Right.
a normal trajectory, and that's so crazy.
It
But
is.
I'm also interested in a connection that you hear about less frequently is the relationship between the colon and the brain. And oftentimes, I think I read a research that showed that people who had Alzheimer's or other brain disorders oftentimes had a very dysfunctional colon.
Well, yeah, and it's I know about that, and it's difficult to tell which comes first, the chicken or the egg. You know, the GI tract, particularly the stomach, small intestine, and all of the large intestine, which includes the uh, uh, colon, descending, the transverse descending all the way down into the other areas, are profoundly innervated by one of the 12 cranial nerves, the 10th one in particular, the vagus nerve. And when the vagus nerve is dysregulated by stress, by environmental factors, whatever, it will cause you to also make that area dysregulated. Now, again, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And it probably goes both ways, you know, but it is the case that the two occur together. And the 10th cranial nerve goes down and innervates all of them, including the sigmoid, rectum, less the anus, but it's still there, and the perineum, much less. But those areas are in the associated with the spine and the sacral area. And sacral, very close to the word sacred. That's no accident. And if those of you who are in the spiritual traditions know that part of the spiritual process is to awaken the energies at the base of the body, the sacred area, and raise her up. And it is a female energy. Raise her up to the spinal line, through the various planes of the body, until you reach the higher levels of the spinal cord, midbrain, brain, neural cortex, and the frontal cortex. But yeah, and she curves 3.5 times around.
Excellent. So exciting to know something about the interrelatedness and interdependence of all aspects of being and the relationship of those two light and the role of melanin in
right. Central. It's central. It's central.
That's good to know. Other thoughts, panelists? Questions, comments?
Yeah, I had a comment. When Dr. Bruce mentioned the vagal nerve, I'm really interested in that work, especially with my clinical interest in racial trauma. I'm trying to really like develop myself professionally to learn about, you know, all the implications of racial trauma, be that neurology, biology, you know, physical, spiritual, all that. So to get that information is super, super dope. And then especially right now when I'm like, when I have this injury, like every time I talk to like a family member or friend and like update them, they're like freaking out. They're like, oh my God, like you're so clumsy, you harmed yourself. And I just have like this weird calmness about it. I'm like, you know, word to my ancestors and some cocoa butter and some vitamin E oil, I'm going to be fine. So I'm glad to hear that, you know, healing has like a spiritual component and just to hear the basis of it. So thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, if you, just to go a step further, we've got 12 nerves in our face and neck called cranial nerves. And the first of that one is called the rather the 10th is called the vagus nerve or the wandering nerve, and comes back from the back of the brain, hindbrain, all the way down through the organ systems, particularly the heart, and going all down further. And the first cranial nerve, the olfactory nerve, it doesn't go all the way down, but by doing certain kind of procedures, particularly, it's a basic clinical procedure of teaching your patients, because I do this all the time, teaching my patients to do slow, steady, even diaphragmatic breathing. You begin to bring into coordination not only the first cranial nerve, the olfactory nerve, which has its nerve endings in the top of your mouth and bottom of your nose that goes directly to the brain. And the 10th, it stimulates the organ systems. You coordinate those two, and you can create a deep relaxation, a parasympathetic response, it's called, throughout the whole body. It's extremely helpful in dealing with trauma. Extremely helpful dealing with trauma. You have to teach the person to be able to watch the traumatic images come up and then not be as reactive to them, so that they settle down and they're literally sort of digested. But this can be done, and we can significantly cut back on the use of many medications some of which have toxic side effects, in addition to what the positive things that they do. So you as a clinician would be able to do something like that. And you also as a clinician have to watch out that you don't get re-traumatized by dealing with people who experience trauma, because that's a common phenomenon of the re-traumatization of family members or others, including clinicians who are dealing with people in trauma. And all of us deal with PTSD, not post-traumatic stress disorder, but post-traumatic slave disorder. And that's a real phenomenon, uh, because all you have to do is turn on the evening news and watch a rerun of what happened to George Floyd, and not only the actual photograph, but the symbolism of the photograph someone on someone's neck as they're crying out for life, and then killing them as if they were a piece of meat that needs to be controlled. That brings back all kinds of deep, deep racial memories, deep racial ancestral memories from not that long ago. I'm not talking about 300 years. I'm talking about 150 years ago, where it was done completely legally. And then long after that, it was also done paralegally in many parts of the country, and still is to this day. And we have people in the United States Senate who are wondering if we need to have an anti-lynching law. Yeah, and this is 2021. So it just goes to show you that how easy it is for many people to dissociate when it comes to someone's pain that doesn't look like them.
Also seems to reflect the fact that their thinking hasn't changed.
For many people, it has not. For the majority of people, it has actually. It has. I'm a progressive about
the majority.
But not enough. Not enough. Look, we still deal with what's going on. But things have changed. We all know that. If we're honest, we know about that. Is it changed enough? No. But that gets us into a whole discussion about, not only the medicine, the medical part of it, but spiritually, why have we put ourselves in this position?
One of the things I've always been interested in, we hear a lot about epigenetic memory related to trauma. So if there's epigenetic memory related to trauma, there's also epigenetic memory related to transcendence and to triumph.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that struck me with looking at the horrific video is when George Floyd called out for mama. And a lot of people think he was calling for his mother, and indeed he probably was to a certain extent. But I believe he was also calling for her, that psychic energy that he knew he needed for transcendence. And that was just so powerful to hear and see.
It was. I saw it too, and I had similar thoughts. I assumed that he was terrified, knew he was being murdered, and knew that this thug who in a uniform that was standing on his neck was going to get away with it, because he had before, and it happens all the time. Not only obviously in Minneapolis, but also in every state of the union. Every state of the union. Now, some much more so than others, that's for sure. But in every state of the union, every state. So, it's a much bigger question than we obviously can answer now or in the near future. But how is that we went from being the creators of the civilization that we currently know of, beginning sometime around 6,000 BCE, probably 10,000 BCE, before the Christ, that civilization, from the pinnacle of that, through successful falls, until our lowest point around 1500 AD. Now we're on a rise again. What is that about? And I'd like to hear some of our scholars and elders address that question, because it's true. To me, Europeans and white people in general, for all of their stuff, are not that powerful.
Not at all. Except the power we give them by
Except
believing.
the power we give them. And many people are under the illusion that somehow Africa was invaded by Europeans and drew out all these slaves and indentured and stolen people. No, no. The vast majority were brought to the coast by other Africans in wars, all kinds of things like that. So we fell from a great height, and now we're crawling back. I'd like someone to write that story.
Well, you know, it has to be written because one of the challenges we face, particularly as non-immigrant Africans in America, is we have now a lot of immigrant Africans in America
Yes.
who have bought the Western idea and are using education for its purpose, which is social economic elevation. But there's a potential clash there that also needs to be discussed.
There's a potential. I agree. And I would only add to that we have to remember that we are the authors of Western civilization through various permutations up through Kemet, Egypt, Middle East, Southern Europe. All of that is a permutation of something that was either started or picked up and run with in the African Genesis, beginning probably around 10,500 BC. You know, at the fall, the dawn of the end of the last ice age. Before that time, a lot of speculation, some other stuff, but the only ones that we know for definitively sure is that one from around around 3 to 6,000 BCE. You know, a few thousand years before the pyramids were built, for sure. And the pyramid age, technically, classically, is around 2000 BC. But many people think that it goes back much further than that.
So there are many ideas. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'd love to jump in and throw in a comment here because, you know, I think of the human experience as recapitulating something that's spelled out in Kemetic mythology, and that is, you know, the ancient classical Kemetic mythology of the story of Asar, or we call Osiris, about how his body was divided up and spread throughout the land, and
13 parts.
Yeah, and eventually, you know, well, sometimes it's 13 parts, sometimes it's more than that, but eventually, you know, his body was brought back together, and that was symbolic of the coming back together and healing of the nation,
yes,
of the people. And I think of the journey of, you know, humanity as we all started out in East Africa, you know, 100,000 years ago, and traveled to, you know, the various ends of the earth, and became divided, much in much the same way that Osiris's body became divided. And I see what's happening now as a recapitulation of that process of us needing to bring humanity back together and make it whole again.
I agree.
In order to go forward. And so I was thinking about what you were saying, you know, last time about our ability to become conscious of this Zola energy. And it seemed as if you were saying that, you know, one of the mechanisms that we have within our human bodies to assist us in becoming conscious of that energy was this neuromelanin. And
yes.
I'm just wondering if I'm processing it the right way, and if you're saying that, in essence, neuromelanin helps us to somehow become conscious of a form of energy that connects us all. And is that energy the same or similar to what Nana Linda was describing as this electromagnetic energy, or is it the same or similar to what cosmologists now call dark matter or dark energy, or
It's
where is it
similar.
on that spectrum? And
Well, from me, from my perspective, the nature of neuromelanin, we have as creatures, as beings, have a greater affinity to it because it has an affinity to light. Again, neuromelanin of melanin.
and does that include visible light as well
It
as
includes visible light. It includes
light?
visible light. It includes visible light and the 98% of light that is not visible, or the 95% of light that is not visible.
Mm-hmm.
And it absorbs quanta. It absorbs the energy. And that includes not only the energies in the electromagnetic spectrum, but the energies across the energetic spectrum that we know of. Currently, there are posited, what we know anyway, roughly, is 4 fundamental forces, quote unquote, forces in nature. The gravitational force, okay, and then the forces of, quote, the atom, the internal structure of the atom called strong force, and then a weak force, and the strong force and the weak force have been united in what's called electroweak force. Okay, so really fundamentally 3, but gravity has not been integrated into those. But interestingly enough, gravity, which there's no physical, there are no graviton particles, that quantum mechanical approach to gravity. It doesn't fit. There are no little gravitons out there. Gravity is a different kind of force, but we feel it in our experience. You can feel gravity. You don't feel the strong force of the atom, but you do feel electromagnetism. So the 2 most fundamental forces in our experience, gravity and electromagnetism, are intimate to your consciousness and mind. We feel it. We feel it. And we have an affinity to those energies through the process of neuromelanin, because neuromelanin structures, it provides the template for our nervous systems, also our internal organs too, but particularly our nervous systems. And I like very much your idea, your notion, your intuition that after the great dispersion of us across the planet, beginning probably around, in our present form, Homo sapiens sapien, probably about 100,000 plus years ago. The DNA, mitochondrial Eve, she was kicking around about 150,000 years ago. And then she left Africa. Well, I should say her progeny left Africa in various waves and went all over the planet and so on and so forth. And they were all Africoid in expression. That only began to change because they moved as Africans up into Asia and South America. Only about 35 to 40,000 years ago, the so-called racial diversification began. Before that time, all of humanity looked like the people in this room in variations on the theme. So the surface racial thing is relatively new to us as a species. But I am of the belief, the intuition, that after this great dispersion, this chiaspora, this spreading out, that the modern age, through our technology and through climactic struggles of one kind or another, are bringing us back together. We'll either learn to live together or we will die. It's bringing us back together, preparing us for the next stage in our evolution as a species. I do believe that. And as in the beginning, I believe the African template is going to provide the template for that. We're going out into space, and this template is going with us. Is the deepest patch, the deepest structure of our nervous system, our brains, our bodies, and so forth. So this spasm that we're going through right now is one of the last spasms of this before we break out into a new era. And all these the folks that occupy the many places in the Senate and the government and around the world, They are dinosaurs. They're dying. And they know it on some level. Those guys last year or 2 years ago, whenever it was, who were marching through the streets in, I think it was Charleston, saying with their white torches and everything, you will not replace us. You will not replace us. They were right. I know what they were saying.
That's what they're afraid of, yes.
That's what they're afraid of. And poor, sad creatures, they think that their ultimate expression is because their skin is white. How pathetic. How pathetic. For me, let me just to say this one thing. I think part of the psychology of people that we call white in the modern world, their sad delusion, unfortunately, those of us who are racist.
I was just egging you on. I said, go off.
Is that they confuse the light of their own consciousness and spirit with the white of their skin. And they collapse their sense of identity around that. And as a result, they die because that breed of the species is going to die off. And what you're going to see is some variation of what is walking around the earth today because, you know, we travel, we intermarry, we have kids, we have all kinds of stuff. The pure strains are going to die off.
I want to jump in, and I think what you're saying is like absolutely correct. And I believe that certain white elites already know that. And I feel like that's why they do certain things to preserve their whiteness, you know, eugenics and things like that. Like it's really interesting. It's like, I feel like, and that's why I feel like so like certain white elites or like white scholars, they're aware of this. And that's why they're afraid of Black people, you know, it's in the sense that they know the power of melanin and African people. But it's really interesting seeing how like everything they're trying to do to preserve it, but in reality, like it won't, like you're saying, there's more diversity interrelation. You know saying like
time, evolution, and the demographics are against them. White skin, you know, no value judgment. It's just a biological fact. White skin is a recessive trait.
Exactly. Yeah, and like in white people, like they were saying, if I'm not mistaken, like blue eyes is like actually a mutation. You know, like certain things. Like
it's an adaptive. It's not necessarily a negative mutation. It was adaptive.
Yeah.
When the African branch moved into Europe, developing longer hair to cover more parts of the body, a thicker body build, and blue eyes that see better in the darkness and then in the fog is adaptive. They are adaptive.
And actually, the evidence is that the blue eyes was an adaptation that came about before the white skin.
It probably did, yes. Probably did, yeah. And there were large Black populations in England around 10,000 BC. The fossil record shows that. Yes, Blacks with Black features but with blue eyes. So it's there. It's just it. So we're going through this current spasm painfully, and those of us who have either been born in this time or perhaps chose to reborn into this time are here to move our species through that. And it's an interesting and great and fearful and exciting time to be alive. And it is quite a gift, folks, to be an African-centered scholar at this time. You get to talk about this.
Because it's African-centered scholars who have the recognition and the motivation to want to do that work.
Right. Recognition and the motivation.
Running away from that work.
And the motivation.
That's the work that humanity needs.
Yes. And 20 years ago, you would have experienced a lot more overt and a lot more covert resistance from other Black scholars.
Tell me about
this research. But now you experience a lot less. I'm aware of that because I remember experiencing it. but it's less now. So I just want to encourage those of you who are in the room listening and those of you who are listening on the YouTube or wherever you're listening to follow up on that and to read Dr. Meyer's work on optimal psychology, because it is the template for what we're moving into. Really, truly, truly.
You know, it's so exciting because I know it's not about me, it's about the truth.
It's about the truth.
And when Set found those pieces and put them back together and she created life and restored life, it's truly what we're doing. And I think when it comes to white people, they don't understand that the color of light is utter darkness. So they're seeking the light and they think it's the light bulb. Them, no, it's absolutely the exact opposite.
The exact opposite. The light emerges out of the darkness. The light emerges out of the darkness, as does consciousness. As does consciousness. I mean, you pointed out earlier, Linda, that what you're referring to is that Zola energy, that electromagnetic energy. Contemporary physics, not necessarily people on the far out there, but contemporary physics, particularly in the quantum mechanical studies, have posited pretty strongly that at the very fundamental level, matter exhibits a fundamental animate, sentient quality. That matter itself, on the most fundamental level, is in some strange way conscious.
Yes.
It is conscious. The universe is conscious. And like our ancient African ancestors said, it's God is life. That's not animism. That's not paleological thought. That's not archaeological thought. That's not paleological. All those pejorative terms. No, it means that the universe is basically alive. And personalism pervades everything. And that is the consciousness that we're going to eventually move back toward. We have to. Otherwise, the earth will spit us out.
It's our salvation.
Modern physics has come to that point where there's a realization that there's something there that has to do with knowledge or consciousness that is not particulate. The problem is that modern cosmology is based on particle physics, and the physicists, a lot of the physicists are still stumbling around because they're still looking for a smaller and smaller particle to find, and they're stumped because they cannot find it.
They can't find it, and the methodology is to assume that everything that is composed of something smaller. Mm-hmm. And that's been a very successful model now for several hundred years. So it's understandable that you don't throw something that phenomenally successful away, but getting to smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller manifestations of it is at some point going to not work. Elements into atoms, atoms into the different forms of quanta, leptons and protons. I mean, on and on and on, and then down to quarks, and then the subquarks, and the quarks with color.
Well,
it goes on and on and on and on and on.
But they got all of the way to the Higgs field, and the Higgs field is basically telling them that there's something that's not matter that turns matter into matter.
That's right.
They know that, and they still have trouble accepting that.
Well, it takes an intuitive leap. It takes an intuitive leap, and part of that intuitive leap that makes it so difficult is that you have to surrender, you have to transcend, to use the Linda's phrase, your own individual self, and recognize that your own individual self is a vanishingly small subset of a much vaster self. And that means that you have to, like St. Paul said, die every day in order to enter into that kind of consciousness. That is the consciousness that we are proceeding into uh, uh, in roundabout ways, but we're going to. And I just want to point out here that the psychologies for that, because we're all psychologists in this room, one form or another, the psychologies that most adeptly and accurately, I think, reflect methodologically that are the meditative psychologies of the quote East, meaning particularly India, Southern India, Tibet, and also the methodologies of entering and surrendering individual consciousness that we find in many of the West African and South African practices of ecstatic dance and possession, where the loa is mounted and the individual self principle is transcended, ever so briefly, it is transcended, and a greater intelligence and consciousness predominates.
So can I ask you this, as what's your advice for what we as an organization of Black psychologists, what we should be pursuing in order to further that kind of consciousness development?
Insist that the Journal of Black Psychology publish half of its articles in classical methodological studies, and the other half, these sort of studies. Yes, because that is the principal journal. And I read it. I do. But I get tired of reading studies about, are we catching up in intelligence? I get tired of reading studies about whose lips are more acceptable than somebody else's lips. I really do. I see a lot of our imagination going in that direction. And if it does, it'll still be there, but it'll become less and less relevant to those who are thinking. I mean, this is jumping off to another track, but 30, 40 years ago, and I'm old enough to remember this, 30, 40 years ago, the magazine that put progressive political ideas and messages and interviews out there was Ebony Magazine. And then over time, they gradually retreated to the point that they never said anything anymore. And they just advertised Buicks and hair products. The same thing is happening to Essence Magazine. They used to be putting stuff out there, that interesting essays and interviews by leading writers and scholars. You may have agreed or disagreed with them, but they don't do that anymore. It's mostly fashion and advertisements. Now, there's always a market for that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But nothing has emerged yet that is not so scholarly as the kind of journals that we read, that we and 600 other people read, and the ones that reach huge masses of people who, by the way, are hungering for this. And the only way they see it, the only way they're able to see it, is periodically in a movie in a symbolic form. But they see it in a symbolic movie. I mean, that movie Black Panther had a lot of stuff in there that was, quote, African mysticism, unquote. And they did it in a very clever, entertaining way. But it was how those ideas got out there. It was ideas about ancestors, about moving to another realm of intelligence and light. Yes, but so far through mythological expression and entertainment is how it gets to the huge numbers of people. I'm looking for one of you folks that's out there on the screen there to break through and write about this, either in psychological work or someone who's listening to this who's a novelist or aspiring film director. Yeah, that's how you reach a lot of people.
I wanted to jump in and interject, because it's funny how you mentioned, that just the evolution of, Ebony and Essence magazines, because like Joseph White, he was actually publishing, his articles regarding Black psychology in Ebony magazine, because that targeted the Blacks outside of those magazines. So it's interesting how, like, the evolution of, like, publishing in more predominantly like Black forms of media back then would be able to target, but now like those same or companies or organizations, they kind of like steered away from those kind of discussions.
Yes.
So I definitely agree. I think definitely figuring out a platform to really, I guess, amplify the message would definitely be important, because like you're right, there's a lot of like Black people who would really appreciate the kind of knowledge and discussions that we have here. And it's just like they don't know where to look, you know, and not everybody's, you know, looking at journaling and scholarly articles.
No, right. Most people don't.
Exactly. Like nobody just wakes up and, you know, let me read psychology. Those are more of like the scholars, but just like the typical layman, I definitely agree, because even in the Black Panther, like you mentioned, there was a scene where the characters, there was one character wearing all red, another character wearing all black, another character wearing all green. And the director purposely did that to represent the Pan-African flag, you know? So it was like kind of like what you're saying as far as the symbolism and things like that is definitely a thing. So I guess like figuring out a way, like how can like Creating Zola Monday or even ABPsi can collaborate with like bigger entities to amplify that message. Because I just wanted to just mention, like, I definitely agree with everything you just said about that.
I just wanted to see if Evan had a thought. He needs to jump in here because we're running out of
time. Sure. I wanted to like echo everything that's been said so far. I thought it was beautiful. And the thing I wanted to add, in addition, I think, to the writings and the cultural manifestations through the arts that needs to occur, is also the real intangible political practice.
Yes.
Engaging with institutions, shifting and shaping how those are created and those operate. I think something that I've been in conversation with a few people about is that we have these conversations, and it's being mentioned here, they stay in scholarly space, they stay in scholarly journals. And the thing that kind of makes me as sometimes like frustrated or pessimistic, right, is we've talked about the extinction of whiteness as an ideology and as an idea of superiority, but we also live in a world in which our lives are so connected to the ideas that were manifest from that, like ideas like the nation state, right? Ideas like capitalist greed, right? Things of that nature. We're so tied to that, right? And so our very life, when you talk about like climate change and the very earth, right, wanting to spit people out, we are tied to corporations not wanting to shift their practices because of that capitalist greed, right? And so I think about, in addition to the writing and the scholarly work, what are the specific, political actions that African consciousness can inspire, that it has inspired, and that we can, as an association, as a psychologist, how can we engage in that? Because there's also a long legacy you can talk about. You can talk about the people here. You could talk about, again, like Fanon. You could talk about Thomas Hilliard, people that have engaged in that kind of political, Bobby Wright, political action, as well as, right, the contributions to scholarship. So I think about both those things too.
I am under the impression that all it would take to really pop it out is a dozen or so of these multimillionaires, Black multimillionaires in Hollywood, to talk about it and to start pooling their money together and started making more films that address this. Nobody's going to sit down and read it, as good as they may be. Nobody's going to sit, very few people, I should say, are going to sit down and get their cup of coffee and curl up in front of the fireplace and open their latest edition of the Journal of Black Psychology. It's a nice journal, very informative. What they're going to look at, however, is a magazine. What they're going to do is they're going to look at a movie. What they're going to do is they're going to listen to popular music. And I know for sure that there are dozens and dozens of very, very wealthy African Americans in this country who are wanting to do this, but are like checking out their neighbor to see if they'll go first. That's very powerful. People are afraid to get out there and potentially look a certain kind of way. I think but you reach a tipping point at a certain point, and it happens. And part of it is happening now. Part of it is happening now. And there will be a backlash against it, that's for sure. That's for sure. But it is happening, not in a straight line, but it is happening. And it's going to happen. And the demographics are in that direction. So again, novels, movies, music. That's how you do it. That's where the great Mississippi of information flows through our continent.
That is so true. I remember in the 90s, one of my biggest honors was a young hip hop artist in New York who did a rap tune CD, and she sampled my speech in her.
Oh.
And I'm going, all right, because that's when you know what you were saying has reached the masses. I didn't know her. I don't know how she even knew, but
right.
That's the kind of thing we need to be able to do.
That's right, and that's right, and somebody's going to break through. I don't know who they are. I hope they're listening out there. They're going to break through. It's already happening in music. It's already happening in music. And we're right on the cusp of that happening in film. It's happening on Broadway. And now that Broadway's coming back. But it hasn't happened in the media of film yet. But it's going to happen. And we're going to see that.
I think it's going to happen more like just having more and more conversations. And I think these kind of conversations will like inspire that next person to try to address that, like even how it is in music, like rappers are just talking about, their mental health and all that stuff. And sometimes sometimes it's not even on purpose. That's just their experiences,
that's right.
Just their lifestyles, and people connect with that. And then having a Black or an African-centered clinician or psychologist to help connect the music to the psychology of it. Like my first Black supervisor, my first Black male supervisor in psychology, he told me to listen to Ready to Die by Notorious B.I.G. from beginning to end. And we had a psychological discussion regarding it, and just being able to just break down different songs and just the connections of it. It was just like, wow, and there is even a whole, I feel like, I don't want to say genre, but a whole section of just breaking down music from a psychological perspective. There's different types of songs that can inspire you, different types of songs, that can make you feel happy, motivated, maybe sad, really bring out certain emotions and feelings, and it's all connected. So I definitely agree.
It's happening.
It's definitely
it is definitely happening. Check out the TV series, The Underground Railroad. It's happening there too. And it's a brilliant fusion of historical drama, but also dreamlike fantasy, and also gradually working in a different kind of African consciousness, and not an African consciousness defined by Eurocentric perspectives, for better or worse, rather an indigenous and inherent, a self-organizing, self-fulfilling African vision, which, by the way, again, is the primal vision of all human beings. We mustn't forget that. We mustn't forget that.
And we're so happy it is, because if it wasn't, we would really be in trouble. But since it is, we got this. But we have to move forward, elevating our consciousness to be in union. One last thing I just wanted to throw out, they're now acknowledging all these extraterrestrial.
Yes, the government has.
Coming back, and they're watching, and they're our ancestors. So don't be frightened by those. They're here to help.
They're here. They are benevolent. They are benevolent, and they are guarding our nuclear facilities so that we don't destroy ourselves.
And they'll help you first personally. They'll bring their light to heal your body as well. So there's just
as long as you are open and you realize that your soul, your spirit, your mind, and your consciousness are inherently non-local. They're not just sequestered inside and underneath your skull. The thought is transcendent. It's non-local. Yes. Yes.
Yes, I was so excited last time when you pointed out that actually consciousness comes to us before we're born and after we're gone.
That's
should
right.
tell us something.
And that's a medical reality, folks. People just don't know what to do with it yet. But you are conscious. You are conscious before you were born. You just don't get born all of a sudden are conscious. No, you're conscious for some time before you're born. And flatline studies and near-death studies are unequivocal. You are conscious for some time after your so-called physical death. So, there's consciousness before birth, there's consciousness after birth. And what are the implications of that? And I'm saying the African systems, including the disciplines, are well positioned to help us explicate that and experience that firsthand. And that is the great genius of the work of African psychologists in this century. Long after I am dust, this work is going to go on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bruce. We'll have to have you back. This conversation is just too good to let it go. And thank everyone for tuning in. And if you didn't catch earlier this month's session, it's on, what is it, YouTube?
Facebook Live.
Facebook Live, okay. And so take a look, and we will be back next month. But thank you so much. I think it's this kind of conversation that is so essential to our healing.
I agree. I feel privileged to have been able to make contact with so many people.